right now, I have zero charisma, or as the kids would say, zero riz. I want to talk about a video. It's already up to. I sound like a fucking idiot immediately. I want to talk about an obscure game no one's ever heard of. I want to talk about a video game no one's ever heard of. I want to talk about an obscure video game that no one's ever heard of. It was one of the first video games ever created. Today I want to talk about fucking... Listen, fuckers, I want to talk about Dragon Quest. I have this bullshit story that I concocted about my uncle and his games from when he was a kid, and he lets me play them sometimes, but that's all bullshit. I know what fucking Dragon Quest is because I have it on. I have all four, and they're on my shelf right now. And I played the first one, and I just want to talk about it. But we're gonna get to that in a minute. The first RPG I ever played was called Final Fantasy VII, and it was released on the PlayStation. Now, the PlayStation is a bullshit console that sucks ass. It's like the PlayStation 5, but it's like a whole lot worse, okay? But it had some good games on it, and Final Fantasy was one of them, all right? If you don't know, Final Fantasy is an RPG, and RPGs are games for dorky loser nerds that take all of the fun and exciting things out of video games and they replace it with fucking math. So you sit there and you attack things using a menu and then numbers pop up. And the only thing that's fun about them is watching those fucking numbers go up, okay? That's the only reason anyone plays RPGs, okay? They want to fight the fucking monsters and they want to watch the numbers go up. Why do people like Final Fantasy so much? Well, it's got a bullshit convoluted story that nobody gives a fuck about. They only like the fucking anime girls, okay? They only play it for the fucking anime girls. The big titty anime girls, the not big titty anime girls, that's who they play it for. And they have this bullshit loser Sephiroth with his big sword that everybody thinks is so fucking cool. But then you have this whiny emo idiot Cloud, and he has a big sword too. And his sword is like really big and wide, and it's called the Buster Sword, okay? They call it the Buster Sword, but you know, that sounds like that's the name you give a fucking dog, okay? You call your dog Buster, you don't call your sword Buster. The only normal person in Final Fantasy is Barret, and he's cool because he cusses and he has a gun. He's the only good character in the entire game. Everybody else is just eye candy or just an emo loser with a big sword, okay? But I actually kind of like the game anyways, even though it sucks and it's terrible, but I liked it anyways. Well, we wouldn't have Final Fantasy if we didn't have Dragon Quest, okay? So, Dragon Quest was released in Japan, okay? Now I've got a joke here that says, I learned it was a video game released in the 50s in a city called Japan. Ha ha ha, the 50s, ha ha ha, city called Japan. Okay, that's the joke that I wrote, and it's stupid, and it's terrible, but I also kind of like it. So the long story is, it is an old-ass game that was released in Japan, alright? It was released on the Famicom, and it was created by 3 guys that only old people and Japanese people know who they fucking are, okay? There's Yuji Horii. He was a game designer, and everybody knows who he is now because he's designed like every fucking video game ever made. He's basically just Cliff Bleszinski, okay? Yuji Horii is just Cliff Bleszinski. And then there was Koichi Sugiyama. What do people know about him? He's old and he's miserable, but he writes good music, so nobody cares. They just let him write his music and be miserable, okay? And then there was Akira Toriyama, okay? The Dragon Ball Z guy. He makes virgin loser anime cartoons about people fighting, and then afterwards they become friends. That's it. That's like the whole fucking thing with Dragon Ball Z, right? They fight, and then they become friends. They hug and they kiss, they get married, and then they have kids. It's weird, you know what I mean? It's weird. They turn a robot into a woman, and then the woman has a kid. Make whatever of what you will of that, okay? So back on Yuji Horii. Yuji Horii was a huge nerd, and he liked to play dorky-ass Dungeons and Dragons games, right? But they weren't Dungeons and Dragons, really. There were these bullshit old computer games that were really complicated, and they were really obtuse, and nobody thinks they're fun unless you're a huge fucking nerd, and that's what he liked to do with his spare time, okay? He was a fucking nerd, and he played games for fucking nerds. That was his thing. And he decided, oh, I want to take my dorky fucking loser games and inflict them on everybody else in the world, right? It was Ultima and Wizardry, okay? So he wanted to make people like Ultima and Wizardry, but they were bullshit games and they weren't any fun. And not everybody had a computer to play them on, right? So, in order to make them palatable for people who are normal and have social lives and friends and have sex with other people, he made Dragon Quest, okay? So he took the old bullshit, stupid, boring RPGs and he added a story and he made the graphics really simplistic and he made the gameplay more simple and basically took everything that made those games special and he just ripped all that shit out, okay? And he left the skeleton, okay? So that's where you get Dragon Quest. Now, this shit was popular as fuck. Everybody in Japan loved this shit. It sold 1 billion copies. 1 billion. It didn't sell 1 billion. It sold like 1.5 million copies, okay? But look, that's like basically everybody in Japan. So it was really successful. That's what I'm saying, okay? Now, I have a bullshit story in here about I can't play the Japanese original. But guess what, motherfuckers? I can. And I've played it. And you know what? It fucking sucks. Okay? Dragon Quest fucking sucks. It's terrible. And it looks stupid. The main character looks like a tap dancing starfish running around like an idiot. And then you open and close a bunch of menus you can't read. That's the entire game, okay? If you want to play the original Dragon Quest, have at it. Have fun with your tap dancing starfish and your Japanese that you can't read, all right? Well, Yuji wanted to make his dorky loser virgin games popular outside of America too. So 3 years after they released Dragon Quest in Japan, they released Dragon Quest in America. Now, we have this bullshit thing called copyright, and there was something already called Dragon Quest in America. And that Dragon Quest, nobody cares about and nobody remembers, okay? All right, so they called it Dragon Warrior. The other thing they did is they took all of Akira Toriyama's artwork that was like really charming and kind of cool, and they just ripped that shit out, okay? They ripped it out and they replaced it with like generic high fantasy art that looks like shit. But they also changed the game so where it was like maybe just a little better, but still bad, okay? What I'm getting at, there is no American Dragon Quest, all right? It's called Dragon Warrior. That's it. So when I bought Dragon Warrior is when I, got bit by the nostalgia bug and I purchased an old NES at a secondhand game and music store. And it was like $20, okay? Well, it turns out I got ripped off because this shit was fucking free. They gave it away for free. Now, if you were a kid in the 90s like I was, you would know that there was a magazine at the time called Nintendo Power, okay? We had magazines back then because we were too stupid to have the internet. And so instead of going on the internet and looking at things on the internet, you got like magazines, right? Well, if you got Nintendo Power, they gave you a copy of Dragon Warrior for free because this shit was not popular in America. People didn't like it, right? RPGs in America were a niche hobby for like nerds that the jocks stuff into lockers, right? But eventually, they gave away enough copies to push it over that 2 million mark. And luckily they kept making them because the games did get better over time. So the things they improved. So the first thing they changed was the graphics. They removed the idiotic looking tap dancing starfish sprites and they replaced them with sprites that actually look kind of like people so you can actually kind of tell what you're looking at. All right. That's the first thing they did. They translated the game into English, obviously, because no one wants to learn Japanese just to play one shitty old video game. And then they added the ability to save. Now, if you played the Japanese version and you wanted to save, you would have to use a password. And that's just kind of what was popular at the time. And it really sucked and it was really stupid, okay? You had to write down a huge string of letters and numbers and then input that again later to bring your save back up. So it was terrible. To alleviate that, they added battery backup saves, okay? Here's the thing. They did it in the most useless ass way imaginable. I'll get back to that in a second though. So at the time you were going to play this on the NES, that was back in the 80s and the 90s. That's all a bunch of bullshit, okay? I didn't play it that way. I'm an adult. I have adult money. Here's how I played the game. I have a retro USB AVS, and it uses an FPGA to upscale the game to 720p, which I play on an HD monitor, okay? This is like the 2020s nerd shit, okay? I'm just gonna be honest, all right? I spend way too much money on this shit, and it's all so I can play really old video games on modern displays. It's because I'm the biggest loser virgin nerd on the planet, and like even more than Yuji Horii was, right? But in the day, you would have to play it on a big old blocky ass NES, just like everybody remembers, on your big ass blocky TV called a CRT, which everybody remembers. And they were heavy as fuck and blah, blah, blah. All right. Now, in those days, I wasn't playing dorky loser virgin games. I was playing a different type of dorky loser virgin game. I played, oh God, The Little Mermaid. And let's see, I also had DuckTales. That was another one that I played. And I had Galaga. That was a game that I had. And Super Mario Brothers 1, 2, and 3. Obviously, everybody had that. And that's it, really. I really didn't have a whole lot of NES games. And so I bought more consoles over the years. I really didn't buy many games for my Super Nintendo or Nintendo 64 either. I really started wasting money on video games when I was an adult, okay? So going back to the whack-ass old NES, everybody remembers you'd have to do all the bullshit where you'd blow in the cart and all that and it would blink and blah, 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 blah. I don't have to do any of that shit. I keep my cartridges clean. I put them in my nice modern FPGA clone consoles and play them on my HD TV, okay? I don't have to fuck with any of that shit. It's just console, HDMI, TV. It works. It's amazing. So even if I wanted to play this stuff on original hardware, all this shit on eBay is really fucking expensive now, okay? NES, like an old NES is like $100. They're not worth $100, okay? They're old and they suck. The only thing that gives them value is the fact that you had one as a kid and you liked it when you were a kid and you want to recapture your childhood. Remember that idea. It's going to be important later. So, I had heard so much shit about Dragon Quest my entire life. They tell you, oh, it's like the original RPG, it's so good, every RPG is based off of Dragon Quest. You know, other bullshit like that, okay? People hype this game up my entire life. So, I sit down and I actually play it. And it sucks ass. And why it sucks ass, I'm going to explain to you in detail. Now, the first thing you have to remember, the NES was a very simple console with a very simple controller. 2 buttons, the D-pad, that's it. It wasn't wireless. There was no battery, none of that shit, right? You had to plug the fucking thing in 6 inches from the TV with your D-pad and your 2 buttons, and that's all you had, right? Well, when you're trying to take a complex genre like an RPG, and you're trying to boil it down to where you can play it on some bullshit thing like the NES, you run into the controls challenge, right? Because you have to walk around, you have to open doors, you have to open treasure chests, you have to talk to people, blah, 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 right? Well, they only had 2 buttons, and I'm sure they worked, around as best they could. But the best system that they could come up with was to make 1 button do every fucking thing in the entire game. Every fucking thing. Everything is a fucking menu, right? So if you want to talk to somebody, you have to open the menu and you have to select the talk option. If you want to open a door, you have to open the menu and you have to select the door option. And if you want to go down a set of stairs, you have to open the menu and you have to hit the fucking stair option. And the problem you run into is you're just trying to play the fucking game and have a good time, but everything you have to do is a menu. And that sucks. That's not fun. All right, I'm getting ahead of myself. When you start, you're in the king's throne room and you're talking to the king, okay? And you're like this, you name your character, but according to the instruction manual, you're just some random nameless hero. And the king has called you, and you're the descendant of some asshole named Erdrick, and he's complaining. Well, what's happened is there is a bad guy called, the Dragon Lord, and the Dragon Lord has stolen something called the balls of light. That joke writes itself. The balls of light. So the king's balls have been stolen. And after the balls get stolen, a bunch of monsters show up. They start wrecking the towns. They start killing all the people. And they do all that other shit that monsters do. The king's bitching about all this shit. And from what I remember, the throne next to him is empty. And he doesn't even mention the fact that his daughter has been kidnapped. The only way you figure this out is by talking to one of the guards in the room. How shitty of a father do you have to be that your daughter's been kidnapped and you just don't even mention that because you're more worried about your balls? Once you get out of there, you have like basically no idea where you're supposed to go or what you're supposed to do. And the only way you can figure it out is to talk to every single person that you run across. Guards and townspeople and merchants, like all these little 8-bit dinglings running around, and you have to talk to every single fucking person because you never know which random person is gonna have that like cryptic hint to tell you where to go. You're just gonna go on the internet and look it up anyways because you're fucking lazy. That's exactly what I did. Now, some of these conversations are pretty funny. I remember there was one point where you talk to a guy and he's like, "Oh, I miss my girlfriend. She was supposed to meet me for a picnic," or something really dumb like that. And then you walk like down to the other corner of the map and there's the girlfriend and she's like, "I miss my boyfriend. He was supposed to meet me for a picnic." And there's some little like, clever stuff like that, and it's kind of funny. And everything's in like pseudo-Elizabethan English, like you're in English class reading Shakespeare and all that. Woohoo, right? So that's fun. But because you have to talk to so many people, you spend like the entire time you're playing the game in the menu. And then when you add in having to use the menu for everything else, they might as well have like cut out anything and just made the entire game menus. Once you finally figure out like where you're supposed to go and what you're supposed to do, that's great. But actually getting there is a completely different story. So I'm going to explain to you right now what you'll be doing for the entirety of Dragon Quest. Here's what you're going to be doing. You'll leave the castle. You'll get far enough away from the castle that there will be a slightly stronger monster than what you're used to fighting, and it will stomp you to death in like 1 or 2 turns. You'll lose half your gold, respawn at the castle, and you'll go, "Oh, if I want to get any further, I have to level up, and I have to buy weapons and armor." That all sounds great, but here's the problem. Every single time you get into a battle, when you win, you get like 1 or 2 experience points and 3 or 4 gold. So you get into all these fights and you get like no gold, you get no experience, and you have to do this over and over and over and over again. The amount of experience and gold you need to level up and buy this equipment, it gets astronomical quickly. You have to grind. That's it. The entire game is a grind to get to the next bullshit part of the game. There's really not even a whole lot that you need to do to beat the game. You have to get a harp, a flute, a rainbow rock of some kind, and you build a bridge, then you go to the castle and you beat the game. The problem is between each step you have to spend like 45 million years grinding, and if you have like one bad battle, you're gonna lose half your gold. There's hours of progress gone. Now, you might say to yourself, "Well, just save the game really often." There is only one save point all the way back in the throne room. So if you want to take a break, you have to walk from wherever you're grinding all the way back around to the throne room at the starting castle to save the game. Now, you will eventually get a fast travel, but by the time you're high enough level to use it, you've already spent like 100 billion hours grinding, and like you'll give up way before then, unless you're an absolute masochist like I am, because I actually took the time to beat this entire game, because what else am I going to be spending my time doing? I'm a loser. What I'm getting at is this. Every game you play is all about that core gameplay loop. Battle monsters, level your character, upgrade your equipment, go to the next area. That's the core gameplay loop for Dragon Quest. Every RPG on the fucking planet is like that. And the reason why Dragon Quest is not good is because that process is excruciating. So I suffered through this entire game. It was not worth the time at all. Now, from the way I've been talking about this game, you'll probably think that I just hate it, and that's not true. It was worth the time, but it was only worth the time for one reason. Nostalgia. I had a nice little happy fun time trip down memory lane, and it kind of made me remember what it was like when I was a little kid playing video games and all that bullshit, ha ha ha, I'm an old man now. And that's pretty cool. It's not enough to save it though. 0 out of 10. I hate every video game that's ever been produced. I hate it.